Welcome to the first episode of Let Them Eat Books. I'm George.
I'm Ethan.
And this is our two-man book club that we're inviting you to join us as we discuss some of our favorite books. We both really enjoy classic literature, and we chose as our first book White Nights by Fyodor Dostoevsky. We chose it, again, we love classic literature. We both like Dostoevsky. It's short. It's only 90 pages, about 90 pages. And if you've done some research on this book in the past year, you may have seen that it caught some attention on social media in 2024 because a popular, I think, TikToker talked about it as a very short, classic, romantic book, a romance book. But it's really not a romance book. There are some quotes in there. There's a lot of quotes in there that I think would make even Nicholas Sparks blush. But it's not really what it's about. It's not a romance book.
So, just a little bit of a plot summary. Definitely going to be some spoilers involved. But this book is centered around a narrator, a young man in St. Petersburg. And Dostoevsky was from St. Petersburg and Russia, but we can't assume that this is St. Petersburg, Russia. It might be St. Petersburg, Florida.
I think so. Yeah, that was one of the big contentions I saw online, was whether we were in Florida or Russia.
We're in Russia in this book, and basically this narrator is quite a lonely young man. He imagines and idealizes the lives of the people in St. Petersburg. He mentions at one point that he sometimes almost says hello to a man, and that's kind of his connection with other humans. And one night he is out walking around and encounters this young woman, Nastenka.
She's 17.
She is a young lady, a girl. Nastenka is a 17-year-old girl, and basically they get to talking because Nastenka was being harassed by kind of a vagrant on the streets. So our narrator kind of rushes to her aid, and they start to talk, and the narrator is very fond of her because he does not interact with people much, and so they kind of agree to meet at the same spot the next night. She's not entirely sure if she's going to go. He hopes more than anything that she also goes to the same spot. And this happens over, they end up meeting the next night, and then they meet a few more nights, 4 nights in total. And throughout, they kind of share with each other their histories. And basically, the narrator does not have much of a history, not much interaction with humans, just a lonely person, as I mentioned. But Nastenka, about a year before this novel takes place, she has kind of promised herself to a young man in marriage, and a young businessman in marriage.
Affluent. Actually, not really affluent. Hopefully one day affluent for her.
Yes.
He's not a loner like this guy.
Yes, so he is more of a normal human being. He has to go off somewhere else for business for about a year, and she promises to wait for him. And so this is a year later. The man shows up back in St. Petersburg, and she hears of it. She's kind of just waiting to kind of learn about what her fate is, if he still believes in their marriage, if he is still abiding by their marriage.
She's been waiting. They agreed to meet at this spot where he saw her crying, where our narrator saw her crying, right?
Yes.
So he bumps into her while she's waiting for this guy, which she doesn't tell him at first, and then they kind of strike up a friendship.
Yeah, and eventually she tells the narrator all of this. The narrator, trying to be a good, kind young lad, despite clearly being in love with her, says, you know what, I will help. You should write a letter to him. I will go drop this letter off for him to receive. And he does this for Nastenka, and they meet up the next night, and they conclude that the man is not going to come back, and they kind of give up hope on that man. And then our narrator professes his love for Nastenka, and Nastenka, everyone saw it coming, and Nastenka kind of comes to terms with the fact that she could convince herself to love the narrator, and they could live a happy life together.
And she's pretty lonely too.
She is quite lonely.
So she's waiting for this guy for all this time, for a year or more, and she lives with her grandmother. They rent rooms in their home. She is probably just as lonely as he is in these moments. And so when this young man, professes his love for her, I think they just like build up this infatuated kind of delusion between themselves, because I don't know if it's real for either of them, but she's as lonely as he is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they're kind of living in their own world at that moment. And then, of course, after they've both agreed that the next day is the day to kind of make things official,
they're walking up and down the road, like hugging and talking about their future together.
Mm-hmm. Then her original husband, planned husband, betrothed, if you will, he shows back up.
Saunters back in.
And Nastenka runs into his arms. She runs back into the narrator's arms. She runs back in the narrator's arms, kisses the narrator, then runs into her husband's arms. And she ends up with that man, the original man she was going to marry. And our narrator reflects on it for a few pages at the end, and he still loves Nastenka. He's very thankful for the experience. So what did you think about the book?
The kiss brought me back to the Garden of Gethsemane. Judas. Great betrayal.
All right.
Arguably,
I knew we'd get there.
Arguably two of the greatest betrayals in literature. Kiss betrayals.
All right.
No, I thought it was a fascinating read. I think that discussing it with you, I saw more delusion, and just like I thought that they were both just kind of crazy and none of it was real. I didn't think any of it was grounded in reality. We talked about themes like hope and love and loneliness, of course, the friend zone. And actually, at the end of this episode, each of us are going to call two people who friend zoned us about 15 years ago. So stay tuned to the end of the episode and you can catch that. That's going to be a lot of fun. Loneliness, love, infatuation, the friend zone. These are all big, important themes from this book. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it also. I really liked Dostoevsky. I enjoyed it because it was short. It was just like a fun, short read. But it's not like a romantic book. It doesn't leave you feeling super warm and fuzzy at the end.
Yeah, I think loneliness is the theme that stuck out the most to me. And especially, I've read several of his novels, and this was actually a book he wrote before he went to prison for roughly 8 years. Or he went to prison for 4 years, mandatory military service for 4 years after that, which we will get more into his life in a future episode.
Probably.
But
very hard time.
Yes, a very hard time. So it's fascinating to read this book, and then Notes from the Underground is kind of the opposite of this book, where there is again another lonely man, but he is very cynical about the world, very angry about the world. So it's pretty fascinating to see those two contrast. But the narrator in this book definitely verges more on the side of idealizing life and the lives of those around him. He thinks that everyone in the city must be living a much more interesting life than he is. And of course, once he meets Nastenka, he falls in love pretty much immediately. And he just has this unrealistic, very hopeful view on life. And actually, that kind of reminds me of the first line of the book. He actually says, "It was a wonderful night, such a night as is only possible when we are young, dear reader." So it kind of highlights the fact that this extreme high and this extreme hope that he experienced is more common when you are young.
Yeah, it sets the stage for the rest of the book. Such a night as is only possible when we are young, dear reader. That's like a very hopeful phrase, but it's also, I think, again, like paints what's coming in the book, which is just like he calls himself a dreamer, and it paints this very like dreamlike outlook on life and hope and romance that isn't really like grounded in reality. I don't know. It's a fascinating look at loneliness, because you think of loneliness as something really gloomy and, you know, downcast. But he's kind of cheery as he's walking around. He has these, like, the buildings that he looks at almost as friends, these people that he runs into that he thinks are acquaintances of his, but they're really not. He imagines everyone going to their summer villas. Everything's, like, idealized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that kind of ties in with hope. Just another theme we were talking about, and how it's almost like he's always hoping for things to be, I don't even know if it's better or just like real for him, to actually develop real relationships. And obviously Nastenka gives him probably the most hope he has ever experienced in his life. And then at the end of that, hope is crushed. But again, I'm trying to take all of the good quotes before George gets to them. On the last page, he says, "My God, a whole moment of happiness, is that too little for the whole of a man's life?" And that is as he is explaining that he's actually very thankful that he got to meet Nastenka. Even though he was devastated by his hopes being crushed, it was still very much worth it to him. And so, yeah, that's a theme that I think people wrestle with as well in real life. Just whether, you know, these moments of extreme happiness or hope or joy are really worth maybe when those moments end, or when those moments don't end up resulting how you expect them to.
Yeah. I didn't realize, I highlighted that quote as well. "My God, a whole moment of happiness, is that too little for the whole of a man's life?" And we also just talked about the first quote. There's no other books on this list, but this might be the start of a list of books that have phenomenal first lines and last lines.
Probably a short list.
It's a short list. It's only one book right now.
Short list, short book.
Short book, short list.
You want to talk a little more about love?
Yeah, I sure do.
Maybe as it relates to
yeah. We'll stick to the book. Later episode, we can branch off a little bit. Love in this book, I don't think it's really in there. I mean, they love each other. I think there's a kinship that grows between them, but they've only known each other for 4 nights. He is clearly infatuated. I don't think that infatuation equals love. I think she does love him, but I think it's more of like a brotherly love. And when she imagines that her suitor, the guy that she's going to marry, is not coming back, that brotherly love turns into convenience, which might turn into a little bit of like, yeah, I could see myself marrying this person and spending my life with the narrator, who's kind of a loner, a dreamer. He's a little, would you describe him as airheaded a little bit? Or do you think he's just lonely? I feel like I give a lot of negative adjectives to him, but then it can all just come back to, well, he's just lonely. So I don't know, sometimes I paint him as like a weirdo, but he's really just lonely.
Yeah, I don't know. In my mind, it's kind of delightful to see like his...
charming?
Yeah, it's charming to see how hopeful he is. And yeah, and like I think this is where I do disagree on the love point. I think that there is love in this book.
You think he really loves her?
I think that he loves her. I think that
in a romantic way?
I do. I think it's in a romantic way. I think that I know that it's easy for all of us to say, hey, this is clearly just infatuation and it's a quick feeling that's going to be fleeting, but I think that we need to still value those feelings, or else what's the point of it all, you know? If we have to qualify our feelings and reach a certain threshold before we accept them. So I think that there is value in this kind of love.
Infatuation can certainly blossom into real love, and who's to say that it needs more than 4 nights? So maybe you've convinced me. Do you think that she loved him romantically?
No. I think that she was convincing. I think that she convinced herself for a brief moment that she could love him, and it's kind of, I don't know, this kind of just goes with how you feel about love in general, but I think you could kind of make a relationship work with a lot of people in life, but I don't think that he was necessarily the one for her.
No.
Like, I think that she was just...
She was really lonely too. We always talk about, and commentary on this book always talks about him being so lonely. And it'll mention her too, but she was really, really lonely.
Mm-hmm.
She was living with her grandmother. Her grandmother at one point had pinned their dresses together so that Nastenka wouldn't leave her side because she was worried about her running off and meeting a young man, or a young man taking advantage of her situation. But she was really, really lonely too. And so her, like, you bring these two lonelinesses together, and they're kind of different, because you're right, he was a little, like, cheerful and charming about his state because he had hope. And I think she was actually in a position where she didn't have hope because she was convinced, you know, starting these nights waiting for the guy to come back, she was convinced that he wasn't coming back. That's why she was crying.
Mm-hmm.
So her kind of sad loneliness, it was easy for her to take that brotherly affection, that kind of infatuation with just the chance of their relationship and say, okay, I'll do this. Huh. Because she was, well, she was young. She was in love.
Yes. She was young, she was in love, and she ends up with the man she was originally in love with. So
I want to read a book written about her story called Nastenka. That's the name of the book. Starts when the original gentleman, her suitor, or the one she's betrothed to, when he moves in to the room above her and her grandma, and then he leaves, and then she's waiting for him. He comes back. We see these 4 nights from her perspective. We see some of her thoughts on it, because we're reading, you know, the dreamer's diary, and see what that would look like. And then what happens, maybe, you know, the conversations, or even just a glimpse into her and the businessman who has returned, walking away from the dreamer standing there. I wonder what she would have said about him.
yeah.
Because the guy probably would have said, well, who was that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Just
that's
a
a good
friend?
point. Yeah. That could be fascinating.
I want to read that book. Nastenka.
George has written 2 books, so that could be his 3rd.
Books. Maybe I'll read my 3rd, Nastenka.
So, what would you rate this out of 4 nights? Out of 4 white nights, what would you rate
4
this?
white nights, I'm giving it, I think I would just give it 4 white nights. I enjoyed it.
Really?
I think it's
I
a
would
great
give
book.
it 3 white nights.
3 white nights? What's it missing?
I reserve 4 white nights out of white nights. 4 white nights out of 4 white nights for books that really make me question things, really make me think twice. And I think that this just wasn't long enough for me to get that deep into it. You know, by the time you're really developing strong feelings one way or the other, it kind of ends. So, and I don't want to say that short books can't be 4 out of 4, 5 out of 5, but it's just in this case, I think 3 out of 4 is appropriate.
Books are very short. I gotta be honest, I was rocked by the end of this. I didn't see it coming. I don't know what I expected. It was written on every wall in St. Petersburg that this guy was gonna come back, and I did not see it coming, and it rocked my world. And so the tears that I shed and kind of those, I had my own nights. They weren't white nights after reading this book, and I needed some time to recover. And so for me, it gets 4 out of 4 white nights.
I do think that, no, it is shocking, even though it's almost like you kind of see it coming, but it's so far to the end of the book, like, it's at the point where you're like, it might just be one of those white pages at the end of the book that's left, you know, and then it's bam,
He's
just
back.
a heartbreaking ending. So yeah, it's structured in a way to where it is very shocking.
I think I'm a sucker for heartbreak stories and romance stories. This is not a romance, by the way. But the ending of this too, when he is back in his home and he's looking out onto everything, and it's really like a painful scene that he's painting. Like everything's really dreary and bleak, but he expresses this like appreciation and gratitude and love for Nastenka, who just like wrecked his world. He thought he was about to go from lonely and never speaking to any women. You know, he told her when they met that he was shaking, and she said, "Why are you shaking?" He said, I don't speak to women often." And And then 4 nights later, they're wrapped in each other's arms, walking up and down the riverside, talking about getting married. And then she just runs back to this other guy. So he goes through something really, really that must have been very difficult for him, but he's still expressing this gratitude and this kind of enchantment with her, which I really appreciated. I don't know. I think that was a really nice way to end the book. Not in like a cliche way, like it wasn't a happy ending. But for him, I don't know. Like, why did he go through that, and why is he gracious for it, and he still loves her? But the last quote, my God, a whole moment of happiness. One single moment, is that too little for the whole of a man's life? I love that line.
That is an excellent line. So what do you think we, as readers, in the year 2025, should take from this?
Well, I think when you get friend zoned. Just kidding. I think that hope is worthwhile. I think what you said was really nice, that moments of infatuation shouldn't be discredited as meaningless. I think that's really powerful, because you're right, it clearly wasn't meaningless if at the end of the book he's still like, he's gracious for the whole experience. He's not shaking his fist at them getting married, he's not angry. He's a little down, but he expresses just this profound appreciation for just that single moment, those 4 nights. I think that's really worth considering, that feelings shouldn't be written off, even if they seem frivolous or just of the moment. That doesn't mean that it's not important.
Yeah, I think similar to that for me is just feel free to embrace those feelings. Don't try to ensure that the high isn't too high so the fall is shorter. Just embrace that high, embrace the low. Just really embrace the feelings that you have, even if they might feel a little bit dumb, or you look back later and you regret having gotten your hopes up so high. I think that this book kind of helps to show that it is worth it. It is worth having that hope.
Do you have a favorite quote from it all?
I think that I said mine, but let me see what else I wrote down. So on page 12, they're talking about kind of the narrator's past, or lack thereof. And he mentions that he's 26 and that he has never made the acquaintance, really, of a woman. And then he says, and I do nothing but dream every day that at last I shall meet someone. Oh, if only you knew how often I have been in love in that way. And she says, how? With whom? And he says, why, with no one, with an ideal, with the one I dream of in my sleep. So I think that really highlights kind of the narrator's state of mind, just that he does idealize people. He even creates people in his mind, which I think is a common thing to do for someone that is lonely. And I think that it just goes with what we were saying earlier, with just, it's okay. It's okay to have these random feelings. Don't let them take over, maybe these idealized feelings, don't let them take over your life, but it is okay to dream.
Do you think they took over his life, or can we know in such a short glimpse into his life?
I don't know. That's tough. I'm sure that for the rest of his life, he's going to be thinking about Nastenka.
Yeah.
So,
well, it sounds like.
But that's not the dream. That's the only real thing.
Yeah.
In his life. So,
do you want to read more about him?
Honestly, I don't know if I want to read more about this narrator. I don't know. I am fascinated by the Nastenka idea. But
I want a book about Nastenka. Yeah.
What's your favorite quote?
My favorite quote: and in vain the dreamer rakes over his old dreams, as though seeking a spark among the embers, to fan them into flame, to warm his chilled heart by the rekindled fire, and to rouse up in it again all that was so sweet, that touched his heart, that set his blood boiling, drew tears from his eyes, and so luxuriously deceived him. I really like that. And then he's talking to her and he says, "Do you know, Nastenka, the point I have reached? Do you know that I am forced now to celebrate the anniversary of my own sensations? The anniversary of that which was once so sweet, which never existed in reality. For this anniversary is kept in memory of those same foolish, shadowy dreams." It's kind of along the same lines of what you were talking about. You were talking about him creating people. Your quote, talking about him like creating people and memories, and it's kind of the same thing here. He's reaching back for things that were once really special to him and really sweet, and yeah, it's just, he's very lonely. There's always, I highlighted a lot of stuff. I always highlight a lot when I'm reading Dostoevsky. I think The Brothers Karamazov. It's like too many. Probably hundreds.
He is my favorite author of all time. I think he's the greatest author of all time. So I fully agree.
The greatest?
Second greatest behind.
Second greatest.
G. Callahan over here. But thank you for tuning in.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think. Comment.
If you read White Knights, let us know. Out of 4 White Knights, how many White Knights are you rating this book? And if you want to see or read Nastenka, the novel, let us know. All right. Oh, we didn't get to the, we're out of time. We didn't get to the phone calls of the 2 people that friend zoned us about 15 years ago, but tune in next time. Maybe we'll bring them on.